Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We are hosting our Dragons alumni hosted gap year panel where we're going to discuss with four of our amazing alumni about their experience with Dragons and how it kind of shaped their future and where they are now and the skills they learned and some of their stories and maybe some advice. So we're going to jump right in. My name is Maya. I'm the marketing associate at Dragons. I'm also an alumni. I did the Nepal semester in the spring of 2016. And I decided to come back last year and come on as a full-time employee. So I'm super excited to be here and facilitate this meeting and help folks get excited about gap years and be kind of a liaison in that process. So before we jump into sort of our panel and our questions, we just want to remind folks that a gap year
Has
is
that been analyzed? And then the green ones,
we just want to remind you all that like a gap year is not an alternative. We think there's obviously some misconceptions out there that perhaps a gap year is, for folks who are falling behind or don't know what they want to do and might feel a little bit lost, but that's certainly not the case. A gap year is truly for anyone. It's an amazing opportunity for you to build skills for your future, whether that's like pursuing college or a career. It's also an opportunity to like make these really meaningful connections with communities in place and your peers, which I think you'll hear about tonight. And then it's also this opportunity to gain confidence and put yourself in situations where you can problem solve and really gain comfortability traveling, as well as taking these skills onward into your future endeavors. And it's also just a break from your traditional day to day, which I think a lot of us benefit from. And certainly on a Dragons program, you definitely get a variety of activities that are super engaging and exciting for your learning in many ways. So I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. Um, Panelists, if you guys could just give a quick rundown of who you are, where you're from, and then your semester is obviously listed below, but if you have a fun fact, you're welcome to share that now. Charlotte, we can start with you if that works.
Yeah, so I'm Charlotte. I'm from a small town in Vermont, and I'm currently at University of Vermont. And I went to Guatemala in the fall of 2023 and had a lot of fun, learned a lot of Spanish. Definitely felt like it was, I guess, the right program for me. I had wanted to travel to Guatemala anyways over my gap year, and then realized Dragons had a program, which was super cool. And I was actually, it's funny how the Dragons Network works because I was at Middlebury College last weekend and I met a student who had done the program in Bolivia from fall 2022 and had the same instructor that I did. And so that was just like a cool connection. And it's just fun that there are so many dragons kind of out there in the world. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Hi, I'm Arjan Sandhu. I am from Greenwich, Connecticut. I'm currently attending college at the University of Chicago. Um, I guess I got into dragons because I had I had two older cousins, one of which is 10 years older than me, one of which is 7 years older than me, and they're both dragons alumni. One from Nepal 2014, and one from I believe it was Indonesia. And that inspired me to do dragons ever since I was, I think, a sophomore in high school. Taking a gap year was always a plan for me because they had been pursuing their plans and they attended college and gap years always seemed feasible for them and it affected them in very positive ways. So I thought that I could benefit from the same thing, and I did. I think taking the semester in South America, 1 month in Peru, 2 months in Bolivia, was the best decision I ever made on my gap year and probably ever. I met so many amazing people, learned a lot of Spanish, I built upon the skills that I learned in high school regarding Spanish and became entirely conversational within 2 weeks of my program, which was awesome. And I met some of the greatest people that I don't think I would ever would have met had I gone to like high school with them. But I still keep in touch with them to this day, even though they're on all ends of the world. So,
That's amazing. Thank you both. We're going to move on to the other two. If you guys could quickly introduce yourselves as well.
I can go. Hi everyone, I'm Sadhana. I'm from Maryland and I did the South America semester this past spring. And I'm now at Occidental College in Los Angeles. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I had known pretty early in high school that I wanted to take a gap year, and I knew the specific kind of travel I wanted to do. And I as a freshman now, I think it was incredibly helpful. And I feel like I really have the tools and um, just the perspective to really come into the classes that I'm taking and having a different kind of knowledge of the world and also myself. So I'm, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm Skylar. I'm in my second semester at Middlebury College. I did the Indonesia semester last fall, and then I started at Middlebury in February. Yeah, so when I first got accepted to Middlebury as a Feb, as they call it, I was kind of skeptical. I didn't know how I felt about um, starting late, and I was unsure about like a gap semester or a gap year. But after my experience with Dragons, I wouldn't change a thing for the world. I've met a couple of my best friends on that trip, and yeah, I'm just really excited to talk more about it and kind of share my experience because I know it can be like a scary leap for some people, but especially with Dragons, you're in really good hands, and I think it's something that everyone should consider doing.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for introducing yourself, everyone. Um, for folks who just joined, I just wanted to say a quick hello. We got started just so we could stay on time a little bit, but um, we're very excited to kind of talk through some of our planning tips, advice, and then really just the experience of our panelists. So we will jump in, and if you have questions, you're welcome to drop them in the chat, but we're also going to leave about 10 minutes at the end to answer any and all questions that you have specifically. So feel free to save them, or if it feels timely, drop them in the chat. But I think the first question I have for this group is, and some of you already spoke about it, is just how you decided to take a gap year, or why you decided to take a gap year, and sort of that process, and maybe when you started. And I don't know where folks are in their journey here in their gap planning, but it might be helpful just to give some insight into that jumping point.
Yeah, so I decided pretty late in the game, I feel like, to take a gap year, kind of, I think it was like May of my senior year. My college counselor suggested that I think about it just so that I didn't get burned out in college, like academically. And I guess I kind of thought, why not? And he said something to me which really stuck with me. He said, like, why not? You're never going to have another chance to take a year off with, low pressure of having to live somewhere, after college. You kind of have to, I guess, get your life on a little bit more. Um, and so I had wanted to travel to Guatemala, um, just because I've heard a lot of cool things about it, and I wanted to get to kind of know more of the spirituality and cultural beliefs. So my mom was like, "Oh, why don't you just see if Dragons has a program?" And they did. And so I decided in the end of June actually to do Dragons for that fall. And it was obviously a great choice.
Awesome, thank you. Does anyone else want to share just their planning process or their decision to take a gap year?
Yeah, I can. I'm also
with
I'm also like Charlotte. I had kind of I had ideas. I knew what gap years were. Like in high school, I didn't actually know anyone who took a gap year, um, but I knew that it existed. And come like junior, senior year, um, I was very burnt out. I felt like if I was going to go to college and spend a lot of money for higher education, like I really wanted to want it. It shouldn't, I didn't want it to feel like a chore or like an extension of burnout. Um, and I wanted to be really thoughtful about sort of the energy and the mentality I had coming into college. Because you really only you do it once, you know? And I did a lot of research because I had a very specific kind of gap year in mind. Um, there are a lot of different programs out there, and I think what makes Dragons so special and so specific, and really the reason I was like, oh, okay, like I really want to do this, like I'm gonna apply and I'm gonna defer, was because coming from the Western world and going to other parts of the world, you have a very specific perspective and bias that you come with. And I didn't I didn't want to do a program that was sort of white savior-esque or had a kind of American-esque bias in the way that we were coming in from this perspective and understanding the history the United States has in these different parts of the world. Um, and also understanding that I was like, I'm actually here because I want to learn from them, not because I have something to teach. Um, and that's what Dragons was. That was sort of the pedagogy that Dragons had. And because of that, I deferred and I applied to Dragons, and the application process is not very long at all. It's really just talking about your interests and then doing an interview. And so I don't want people to be scared about like applying and all of that because it really didn't take that long. But that was sort of the reason why I chose to take gap year because I knew I was interested in studying and interested in getting into social justice. And I felt like if I was going to be sitting in class learning about critical theory and learning about um, how we make our world better, that I needed to have a perspective that was not just American, that I needed to go and see another part of the world before I could build any concept of what is right and what is wrong. Um, and so I think my gap year is was completely necessary. Um, and I feel very lucky, and I encourage anyone who's sort of feeling the same way to do it.
Thank you. I think for the other two, maybe we could talk about why you chose to take a gap year, but also maybe why you chose to go with Dragons as well.
Yeah, I can go. I touched on this a little earlier, but I knew I really wanted to go to Middlebury. I applied early decision there, and there's like a little box that's you can check off that says, do you want to start in fall? Do you want to start in February? Or are you fine with either? And I just said fine with either. Sure, I really want to go to Middlebury, and I got in. And like I said at first, I was a little skeptical of taking gap semester, but I started to do more research, and I got pretty excited about the idea of doing something like Dragons. Like Sadhana was saying, it's they do a really cool job of not trying to be like white savior, or it's not very like service based. It's more around like actual responsible cultural immersion and cultural exchange. Um, and having grown up in New England and kind of spending my whole life there, I knew I really wanted to get out and see the world. And there's no better group than Dragons that kind of guides you through that process of learning how to travel and learning how to be respectful and responsible with those travels. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I mean, I came into my gap year knowing that I wanted to take one, and that I wanted to get involved in, um, different trips kind of around the world. And I picked all of my trips besides Dragons were on my own, that I had done afterwards. But I picked Dragons as a program because I mean, first of all, the reputation that it had, both in terms of safety, in terms of building bonds with the communities that you visit, very strong connections you have regarding giving back. And it didn't really feel like one-time service. Like I had done trips through other programs, like summer trips, when I was when I was like much younger. And the kind of service that we did there didn't really feel like it was having much of an impact. It did feel very white savior-esque. And so when I had heard from my relatives about dragons, it separated itself from any other program that I've heard of, not only because it's much longer, and you are not only visiting other communities, you're living with them, you're living with people from all sorts of economic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, um, but you're also with students from across the world. And that also to me was very attractive because I wanted to be with a group of people that could, um, you know, teach me as much as I could teach them about my culture. While we all collectively learn about a culture totally foreign to us. You know, none of us had gone to South America prior to this trip. And it was so eye-opening to me. And I think Dragons definitely lived up to his reputation and, you know, in my experience.
That's great. It sounds like you guys all had relatively clear paths on taking a gap year, that's exciting. I'm curious to hear if there was anything that was surprising about your program or your gap year, maybe that you weren't anticipating, or maybe a challenge that you weren't expecting that you're able to overcome, something in the realm of you couldn't plan for sort of situation or experience.
Like with like on the program of like on the dragon program. Yeah, I can go. I think the homestays are both that's definitely something that I had never done homestays going into where there be dragons, and I was not anxious, but you know, you're going to stay in another family's house for a little while, and I think those were the parts of the trip where I experienced the most growth of just like learning to navigate that, and sometimes there is a bit of a language barrier. Um, but all of the families were so lovely and like I love them so much and they're so generous and kind. Um, and so it was pretty cool to like work through that challenge of staying in a different family's house and having that be tricky, but also getting to just experience something so incredible and like transforming and wonderful all at the same time. There's like a lot of different emotions and things going on all at once. And that was definitely like the most valuable part of the experience for me was my time in my three different homestays, without a doubt.
Yeah, I think we hear that a lot when we're talking to students. I think it's a little bit of a point of anxiety about going to live with, a family that you've never met before, or maybe you don't speak the same language of, but we always hear it's one of students' favorite parts when they finish their program. They wish they had more time with their families and they make really deep connections in the time that they're there. Um, so I think it's always helpful for prospective students or students thinking about taking a gap year and going to live in a place that feels very new to them, that there are kind of these stories that, really build deep connection and future friends and family for that matter. Did anyone else want to comment on like how they felt surprised by their program or on their gap year?
I can go. I like try so homestays are a big one, but and I completely agree with what Sky had to say, but the treks are also a specific kind of growing experience. Not necessarily because of the camping and the hiking. I think people don't realize it, but you adapt really quickly. Like you figure it out, and um, your instructors are there every step of the way explaining. Like I didn't know how to set up a tent my first trek, and I learned, and then like me and my friends we like started to time ourselves. We could do it like super quick. um but the real sort of surprising thing is like when you're on trek, you're with a small group of people. uh every second of the day for like a couple of days. You're just not spending time with anyone else except for nature, which I guess, is its own entity. You get close to nature on this trip too, but um, you've never met these people. And so I think some of the skills that I think I'm really taking and applying, like just in everyday life, is like learning how to be with other people and learning how to connect with other people and like take care of yourself and take care of other humans. Like interpersonal relationships are something that I originally considered myself to be very, very, good at, but I hadn't, lived with people I'd never met in the middle of nowhere before. And I think you have to learn how to compromise, you learn how to work together. And, there's points on trek when you're like hungry and tired and you still have to set up tent and cook, and you just really learn how to have compassion for yourself and have compassion for others. And that's just something that you're going to take with you your entire life, is sort of understanding like when to have grace for yourself and for other people. So I think, yes, I think I came into college and was not scared at all of the orientation process and meeting a whole bunch of new people, because I just sort of lived with a whole bunch of people I'd never met before for like 3 months. And you can do it, and you learn so many things about yourselves, and that doesn't even have to do with culture or your own interests. It's just like very like self-growth, like mindset, understanding how to interact with other humans in like the best way possible. So yeah, I think that was probably surprising.
I think definitely, yeah. I was gonna say the homestays, and then I was gonna say the treks. I think that everything you guys said, I agree with 100%. Like, I'm still texting my homestay brother to this day. I texted him this morning because we're just so close. But about the treks, I think that that in particular definitely was a type of, because I've been on camping trips like a lot growing up, but the thing with Dragons, it being such a long program where it incorporates so many experiences besides trekking, um, I found that the relationships that I built with people on during the course of my trip was something so unique that I never had with any other friends before. I've never had with even family. You see each other at like some of your highest and some of your lowest. There's a lot of strength and adversity. That term has been tossed around a lot during my trip, strength and adversity. When you're on these treks, you gotta accommodate for everybody's physical needs and everyone's moods, and then you're traveling for 12 hours on a bus between borders. That's a whole interaction of itself. And then there are times where you don't even see people for 4 days because you're with your homestay family, and you're adjusting and whatever, and you just haven't interacted with anybody in your group except for your instructors for a few days. And when you come back together, it's a whole new interaction. So I think that the sheer diversity and depth in the relationships that I built with people on my trip was something that I never would have expected. But it was, I would say, in my opinion, the best thing that I got out of this trip was, the ability to connect with people on a level that I had not experienced at before in my life.
Yeah, I think kind of piggybacking off of what the three of you have said definitely learning how to just meet new people and be in new situations. And then another thing that kind of really impacted me was um, getting to know the other students from the United States, or I only had United States students on my program, because that kind of added another layer of cultural difference. Because like I'm from a very small town, but the people on my program were from Atlanta and Denver and Chicago and like these big cities. So that added a different layer, which just made each experience in Guatemala and in the south of Mexico so much more rich, because everybody had their own opinion, kind of that they brought to the situation. So we were able to learn so much more from kind of going off of what the others thought and hearing other people's point of views also. So that was, I guess, something that was kind of stood out to me. Bye, Sky. But the other thing I wanted to say was definitely like independence. Like you both had mentioned, um, being away from the group for a few days at a time, just being with your host family, there's so many times that I was like, wow, I'm just like in this different country, living with these people, and I'm doing it, and it's fun, and it's so cool, and I'm learning so much. And then now that I'm like here in university, it feels like I feel very prepared. I feel very comfortable being myself and, being confident in myself. And so that was like definitely something I learned. And then the very last thing, well, not the last thing, but a third thing, um, that I guess kind of surprised me was remembering that like our instructors are people too. And, it's a very safe program. It's very well tailored. But when I was in Guatemala, there was a lot of protests, very positive protests that were happening. And so we ended up not doing our trek and just staying in the same small town for an extra week. And that was like totally unplanned, but it was super awesome because we got to spend more time with our families and got to do some cool other things. But it's just so fun to be interacting with the world in this like very dynamic way where like my life in Guatemala totally reflects everybody else's life in Guatemala at that moment of like staying put for a bit. Um, yeah, so kind of reflections off of what everyone else had said, and then just like that piece of independence and flexibility.
Yeah, I think the flexibility and like kind of surprise in those instances is good to bring up because our instructors, a lot of them have this cultural fluency or they're from the regions that we travel to, um, which is a huge plus, especially when maybe you've never been to the country before, and a lot of them they are going to some of their home communities sometimes. So they're very well connected and they're able to adapt in ways that feel really simple, I think, for the students and like comfortable. And that's a huge reason why, we're so excited about, sharing our instructors and their backgrounds because they really do have a level of experience that's um pretty rare to find sometimes. So I'm happy to hear that was a good experience for you. I'd love to know if any of you, it sounds like you all might have made some friends that you keep in touch with from your Dragons program. I'd love to hear if you guys keep in touch or like homestay families, kind of that dynamic of how you've like kept in touch since the end of your program, which it sounds like all of you did it in 2023, so not too long ago, or 2024.
Yeah, I am in touch with a lot of people. I'm in touch with all three of my instructors still, and they're all not from the United States, so it's fun to just get to practice my Spanish and texting them. Um, and then I'm actually over fall break next weekend. One of my friends who goes to a school 3 hours away, I'm going to go pick her up. We're going to go visit our other friend in Boston and then come back to my house. So that's exciting because it's like been almost a year-ish since the program ended. Um, and then actually I'm really close in touch with some of my Spanish teachers from Guatemala. And we had independent study projects, and I studied kind of Mayan cosmovision and spirituality, and the man that I kind of was my mentor through that process. So I'm in touch with him and my Spanish teacher. And then of course my family's like there was a new baby in the family a few months ago, and so I've been getting lots of pictures, and it's super fun to feel like you have people in another country who care about you and who you care about, and to know if I were to ever go back, I would be welcomed back, and creating this like reciprocity with these other people is really beautiful and a very cool thing to have in my life, and I hope that it brings them the same like feeling of connection that it brings me.
Anyone else want to share? We also have a bunch of other questions. If I know you guys have both talked about your connections with friends, post Dragons program.
Yeah, I mean, you're with people for so long and you just forge really beautiful, like deep relationships with people because I mean, my best friend Kate is actually coming and visiting me, um, like in 2 weeks, I think, or maybe a week. And she just did the program with me. And I think it's really cool because you have these friendships and you have these people that have seen you like at your best and at your worst, like post trek, like haven't showered in 4 days. Like, they just really they've seen it all. Like waking up in the tent at like 5 a.m. Um, you've never looked your worst, but at the same time, it's like the best feeling ever to just have these people that you have such a specific experience with. Um, so yes, these connections run deep, and I'm really grateful for them.
When people tell me like, oh, like how was your trip to South America? Like, was it a good trip? Like, I really don't like to say that word because it seems like it was like a vacation when I think honestly, mostly because of the fact that you see people at their highest and lowest, and because of the relationships you build, it really doesn't feel like you're on a trip. It feels like you really are living there. Like, I don't want to be that gap year student that's like, oh, it was a lifestyle, but it really was a lifestyle. My gap year, like those 3 months in Bolivia were so far removed from my comfort zone. Um, that it's something that it was really hard for me to also describe my trip to my family because of course when I came back from the airport my mom immediately says, well, tell me everything. Well, it's like giving the whole life story at that point. It was hard for my family to resonate with the type of experiences that I had um because again it's like living in a totally different community. It's living in a whole different world than what anybody is used to. I come from like I come from Connecticut, but I went to school outside New York City. My parents work in New York City. So you'd think that I'd be communicating with people from all sorts of walks of life, and I do, but it was really, really out of my comfort zone in the best possible way.
That's awesome. Thanks all for sharing. I want to try to get through two more questions and then we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end, just if anyone has questions of their own. But I'd love to hear, and I mentioned this in kind of the beginning of the presentation, is that students have sort of this idea that they're going to miss out or have FOMO when they go on a gap year, take a gap year, and they kind of like either miss out on their first year of college when their friends are going, or maybe are like missing time during their senior year if they take it early. And I'm just curious if kind of during your program or planning for your program or even post program you felt that, or if it was kind of like an afterthought. Um, and then I think also just to tack on to that, I would invite you guys to give some advice for students who are just thinking about taking a gap year but are kind of unsure on the fence.
I would say definitely like I had absolutely no FOMO. What like after my trip, I was afraid that I was gonna be missing out on stuff before my trip because I had all my friends on Instagram posting about their freshman years in college. But in the back of my mind, I always knew like it's okay, I'm gonna be doing that. Um, but to be fair, I had a lot of people. I had actually a couple people on my trip who college was not part of their life plan. I had a guy, one of my best friends on my trip. He's from Bozeman, Montana, and he's going to trade school in Seattle. He has his own house right now, and he's like a full-on adult, even though he's like younger than me. And so again, he had no FOMO because while some of his friends were going to college, some were going to trade schools. He told me something very insightful on my trip, which was there's only going to be a few times in life where you can experience something like this. And for people in our generation, now is maybe the only time. And so if I didn't take a gap year, I probably would have been at U Chicago studying econ like everybody else at the school. But the gap year, like when I tell people about my trip and how it changed me and it changed like it gave me a new perspective of what I want in life. Um, I find that other people have the FOMO. And I have adults telling me, "Oh man, I wish I took a gap year at your age." I tell people every time it's the best decision I ever made. And now I'm at U Chicago, and my entire course of study had shifted from what I thought I wanted to study before my gap year. I'm now studying history, and And the service work that I did in Dragons, inspired me to get involved in the Army ROTC program here because that is something I want to pursue in terms of, giving back and, influencing my community, both locally and nationally. So again, I had no worries because I knew that this was going to benefit me no matter what.
Yeah, I think what Arjun just said about other people feeling like, wow, I'm the one who maybe was missing out after not having done a gap year. And obviously, like everybody's path is their own and it works out for everybody in the end, hopefully. But all the adults I've encountered have said the same thing, like, really good for you. I wish I had taken a gap year. All my friends, when I got back, they were in the middle of finals and they were like, oh my gosh, Charlotte, you were right. Like we should have thought about it. Um, and it's just like with the FOMO part, I guess I did have a little bit of a thought, like I'm going to be a year older than everybody else. Um, but that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because like nothing replaces what I learned and how I matured and how I grew and how prepared I feel to be in college and, how excited I am now to like use college to do what I want to do instead of kind of seeing college as something I had to get through. Um, so yeah, there might be FOMO. People might do some things without you, but you're going to be in the middle of this super cool country, hiking through a forest, or meeting kids and speaking a different language with them and playing a ball game, or whatever you're doing, and that's like an irreplaceable thing. During transference, which is like the last few days of the program when you're kind of preparing to reenter society, we were lucky enough to get to be right on the Caribbean. There's a little section of Guatemala that hits the Caribbean, and we were just looking out over the water thinking like, wow, we could be in school right now and instead we're here. So yeah, like nothing, if you feel FOMO, that's okay. Like you're going to miss out on stuff, but also like you're going to have a great experience and you're going to have those same like fun freshman year experiences when you do go to school or if you don't. And then if you're considering taking a gap year, do it. There's no reason not to. You will like it. You will enjoy it. You will learn so much. It might not be fun at points. Like I definitely had points last year that, yeah, they weren't fun, but life isn't fun sometimes. School isn't fun sometimes, but you just learn so much. And like, you will be so grateful that you decided to do it. So do it. Don't question it. Don't overthink it. Just do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think those two covered it beautifully. I I did and I didn't. It's funny. The people I was talking because I did spring semester, so I didn't do fall. And so I kind of had a period of time where I was watching my friends sort of start um freshman year, and like a lot of people have a lot of anxiety going into freshman year, and so the stuff that I was seeing was really like anxiety ridden. Like you get to orientation and then you're like meeting all these people and hard to like you're forging friendships, but they're not like deep friendships. You still sort of feel a little lost, the beginning of freshman year. And so I really wasn't having FOMO because it was a lot about like classes and midterms and like, oh, like this is not like I don't have, my childhood friends here anymore. I have to like make new deep connections, just take time. And so as awesome as it was to see them sort of grow and find community, which by the time I came back from my program, they were like, I'm so sad to leave, right? But I was so sad to leave my program. So it was sort of like, the same thing. And I learned so much that I wasn't taking essays. I mean, writing essays, taking exams, like you're having experiential learning, I think is something that everyone should do at least once in their life. Because you're learning without fear of failure. You can't really fail this program. And everybody learns at a different pace and in different ways. But you're like taking a Spanish class and you're not getting graded. I had homework and like we would talk and we did like my Spanish teacher would make me and my friend Rory do like debates in Spanish. And obviously you get really into it. Like I wanted to win the debate. But you're not getting graded for it. There's no one there that's like, no, you are bad at learning Spanish because you just can't be bad at learning Spanish when you're like surrounded by a whole bunch of people that are also speaking Spanish and also learning. Like it's just a really nice, freeing way to learn. And it's the reason why I remembered, like, oh, I love this. Like, I'm so excited to go to school and learn because I just got the chance to learn in a way that most people don't because of, the way that the education system works. So I think I really didn't have FOMO. I felt bad for all of the people that went straight from high school to college and haven't gotten to experience this. Um, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something that's so great about a gap year is I think you do come back, or a lot of our students come back feeling really refreshed and, like you said, very excited to learn. Or kind of this like newfound passion for learning like a language, or diving into even like a different major than maybe they were anticipating. And it's kind of just like that exposure to community and place, and people who are different from your community that really are able to um, push those passions and interests. I'm curious to hear more about if your program, like how your programs affected your language skill, or if that was like a big draw to go on one of these programs, was to increase your um, kind of like language competency, or that was just kind of part of why you chose the program.
I mean, for me, like language competency was sort of part of the program that was going to be like a given. It wasn't something that I had like targeted. Um, However, like I know like a lot of people on my trip who learning the language was a very big part of why they chose this program specifically of the Dragons programs. Um, I do have to say that um, becoming um, skilled in speaking Spanish gave me benefits because I mean, not only, does it help you live around these, countries. I was placed with a family because that like had I guess like an expert level Spanish speaking skill. They spoke no English whatsoever. And so I was really excited. Uh, when I ended up going to my home state family, I found out that the reason why I was placed with such a linguistically difficult family was because actually the both the mother and father, my homestay mother and father, actually almost only spoke Quechua. And so had been speaking entirely Spanish with my homestay brother and homestay sister and all their friends. But when I was with like my homestay mother, we'd be cooking together. She'd be speaking to me almost entirely in Quechua. And so that was something that I didn't expect, but it was amazing because I got to learn an indigenous language that not many people in the world get to speak. Um, and I actually have my notes of Quechua in my notebook right here in college, which is pretty dope to reread and look back into.
Yeah, I definitely wanted a Spanish focused program. I took Spanish kind of through high school. And there's something about just like classroom Spanish and like real world Spanish that is really different. So it was so fun to just learn how to kind of have a conversation and learn the little phrases that people do say, but they don't learn in class because you're not eating a meal in class and saying like "Eureka" before every time you take a bite or whatnot. So it was, I feel like, not super difficult for me because I had a pretty solid background knowledge in Spanish. But I still obviously like learned a ton and it was so worth it. But also I know that it might feel scary if you're somebody who doesn't know a lot of Spanish and who doesn't have a super strong or even any Spanish background. But at least like the Guatemala program, you didn't need to know Spanish. And there were people who had taken maybe a year and couldn't speak a lot, but as a group, we helped them and it worked out with our host families and it ended up being really sweet. And it's fun for host families to help teach you Spanish. And it's fun for Spanish teachers to help teach you Spanish. And so it really also like works out for all levels of language speakers. So don't feel like you need to be at all fluent going into the program.
Yeah, I like also wanted to sort of touch on that, the same as Charlotte, that there were some people in my program that had not spoken any Spanish in their life, really. And yeah, it became like a running joke because one of the people in my program, like the only Spanish he knew was the song Vamos a la Playa. And so He would just, that's what he would say. I'd be like, vamos a la playa. And I'm like, there's no beach here. We're in. But anyways, it's just to say that like they took Spanish lessons and they communicated with your like with their families because it's, you get there and my family also, I realized they spoke both Spanish and Quechua. If I remember my first homestay in Bolivia, I got there and they would speak to me in Spanish and then they would speak to each other in Quechua, but I wasn't quite picking that up. And so they'd speak to me and then they would speak amongst themselves like at dinner and stuff. And I was like, wow, I didn't know my Spanish was this bad. Like, I really don't understand like a single word that they're saying. Like, I have extended family from Latin America. Like, I've grown up around, like, I had like a pretty good foundation of Spanish going in. I remember just sitting there being like, I need to talk to my tia about this. Like, I don't understand Spanish at all. And then I finally realized, I was like, oh, they're not speaking Spanish at all. So that was definitely I just remember I started laughing at the dinner table and they all looked at me like I was crazy and I was like, I can't even explain this to you right now. But um it's just it's even in some ways less about learning the language and more about learning how to navigate a world with a language barrier. There are programs that are specifically like you go and sit in a classroom for like 3 months and you just work on Spanish. And I want to be clear, like that's not this. It's a whole bunch of different components. And so you're not necessarily going to become completely fluent in Spanish, but if somebody drops you in the middle of a Spanish speaking country, you're going to be just fine. You know, will you be able to discuss like deep philosophical things in Spanish? No. But you'll be able to get around. And that's what the Spanish classes are focused on. During Spanish class in Tiquibaya in Bolivia, our Spanish teachers took us to the city, like took us to Cochabamba. And my Spanish teacher's like, she was like, I want you to find this specific part. I want you to find the artisan sector of the city. You're going to go around asking people where it is. You're going to find it. Then you're going to meet me back at this spot and show me where it is. And literally, I was just going around asking random people. I was like, perdón, sabes? Like, do you know where this is? Um, and I did that for like 15 minutes and then I walked back and then so it was very it's life skills. You might not have a completely full understanding of all of the grammatical parts of the Spanish language, but that's not what this program is about. This program is about using your the abilities you have that you're learning in your Spanish classes, but also just like navigating and like feeling comfortable in the fact that you can do this, you can be on your own and figure it out. I think is like the more important part than I wouldn't want to be stressed. Like you're not the goal is not to come out fully fluent necessarily, and you shouldn't put that pressure on yourself. Uh, but yeah.